I am a 68-year-old grandfather, and I never imagined that a simple drawing would shake me to my core right in the middle of my own son's wedding. People think old men like me fade into the background, quiet and harmless, sipping wine in the corner while the young celebrate. But I swear to you that night, as I sat at a perfectly decorated table with the music of a jazz band floating in the air and the scent of roses filling the hall, I held in my hands a piece of paper that felt heavier than 1,000 bricks. My 7-year-old grandson had drawn the bride, his soon-to-be stepmother, not as a glowing angel in a white dress, not as the woman who was supposed to bring light back into our family after years of grief, but as a monster. She had red eyes, jagged teeth, and streaks of what looked like blood dripping from her hands. His tiny fingers clutched the paper before placing it in my lap, his eyes wide and pleading, and his whisper cut through the laughter of the room like a cold knife. "Grandpa, promise me you won't tell her I drew this." I froze. My heart skipped as though I had fallen through a trap door. Around us the world kept spinning, guests clinking glasses, the bride laughing loudly in front of cameras, my son glowing with pride as he walked from table to table. No one noticed the storm that had just exploded in my chest. I stared at the crude lines of the drawing, at the distorted face, and I could not help but feel a chill run down my spine. Children draw what they see, don't they? Children put on paper what their mouths cannot say out loud. Was this just a boy's imagination, or was it a cry for help? I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to smile at him, ruffle his hair, and say, "What a funny drawing, my boy." But his eyes, they weren't the eyes of a child lost in silly play. They were the eyes of someone terrified, someone who had seen something he could not put into words, so he turned to shapes and colors to express it. I leaned closer, my old knees trembling under the table, and whispered back, "Why did you draw her like this?" He shook his head furiously, clutching my sleeve, and his voice cracked as he said, "Because that's what she is when nobody's watching." The words hit me like a fist. I felt the room tilt. In that moment, I could not even hear the music anymore. My mind was flooded with questions, each one darker than the last. What had this boy seen? What had he endured that made him reduce the smiling bride into a beast on a piece of notebook paper? And why, dear God, had I not noticed it before? I folded the drawing slowly, hiding it in my palm, while forcing my lips to curve into a faint smile for the relatives at the table who were watching us. My grandson slipped his hand into mine, under the table, squeezing as though begging me not to let go. His palm was cold, his fingers trembling. He was only 7, and yet he carried the weight of a secret too heavy, even for a grown man. I felt as though the blood in my veins had turned to ice. I am not a man who startles easily. I have lived through war, I have buried my wife, I have carried grief so heavy that silence became my only companion for years. But nothing prepared me for that drawing. Nothing prepared me for the look in my grandson's eyes when he begged me to keep quiet. That kind of fear cannot be faked by a child. That kind of fear is carved into the bones. I looked at the bride across the hall. She was radiant, her gown shimmering under the golden chandeliers, her laughter spilling like champagne, flawless in every gesture. She looked like the very picture of joy, the promise of a new beginning. But as I glanced down again at the monster on the page, at the sharp lines my grandson had pressed into the paper with all the force of his small hand, I felt bile rise in my throat. I could no longer see her as everyone else did. I saw the possibility of cruelty behind her smile, venom behind her charm. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. I loosened my tie, pretending to adjust it so no one would notice my trembling fingers. I wanted to stand up to grab my grandson, to run out into the night and never look back. But I didn't. I stayed seated, my heart thundering in my chest, my mind screaming for answers. I kept asking myself one thing. Am I imagining this, or is this boy showing me the truth no one else wants to see? I must confess something. For years I have lived with guilt. Guilt that I wasn't there the night my daughter-in-law, my grandson's mother, died in that car accident. Guilt that my son drowned himself in work while his boy cried himself to sleep. Guilt that I, the grandfather, had to become the shield, the comfort, the storyteller of his mother's memory. And now, to think that I might have failed him again, that he had been suffering in silence under the gaze of this woman while I remained blind, it burned me worse than any fire. I gripped the drawing tighter, the crumpled paper cutting into my skin. My grandson leaned against me, his small head pressing into my arm, searching for safety. I looked down at him, his wide eyes begging me to protect him, and I knew that this night was not going to be about celebration anymore. It was going to be about survival. And here I am telling you this now because I need to know if I was right to believe him. If I was right to take that drawing as a warning rather than a childish fantasy. What would you have done in my place? Would you have laughed it off? Told the boy to stop drawing monsters and gone back to your glass of wine? Or would you have looked closer beyond the smiles and the photographs to see the darkness hiding in plain sight? Comment now. Type the number 1 if you would believe the child, if you would see the monster in the drawing as the truth. Or hit like if you would shrug it off thinking it was nothing but imagination. I want to know. Because in that moment I had to choose, and the choice would change everything. When I held that drawing in my hands, my mind could not help but wander back to the years before, to the days when our family still felt whole, before the cracks began to form, before the silence of grief swallowed us. To understand why that drawing shook me so deeply, you need to know what we lost, and what we thought we had found again. I met Maria, my first daughter-in-law, when my son was still young and full of fire. She was the kind of woman whose smile could light up a room, whose presence made even the hardest days seem bearable. I remember the first time she came to our house carrying a bowl of homemade chili, shyly offering it to me. I tasted it and laughed, telling her she cooked better than my late mother ever did. She blushed, and from that moment, I knew she was family. She wasn't just my son's wife, she became the daughter I never had. The years with Maria were golden. She gave birth to Leo, my grandson, and I swear to you, that boy brought more joy into my life than I thought possible at my age. I would sit on the porch with Maria, listening to the laughter of the child chasing a ball across the yard. She would tease me saying, "Dad, you spoil him too much," and I would reply, "That's the privilege of being a grandfather." Those were days filled with warmth, with hope, with the belief that life, though cruel at times, had given us something precious. But fate has no mercy. The night of the accident is seared into me like a scar that will never fade. I was in the kitchen when the phone rang. The officer's voice was cold, almost mechanical. There had been a crash, a truck losing control, and Maria was gone in an instant. I dropped the plate I was holding and it shattered on the floor, but the sound was nothing compared to the shattering inside my chest. At her funeral, rain poured from the heavens as though the sky itself wept for her. My son Alex collapsed in front of the coffin, his shoulders shaking with a grief no father should ever endure. Leo, only 4 at the time, clung to me with his tiny hands and asked in the softest voice, "Grandpa, where's Mommy?" And I, fighting my own tears, whispered, "She's in a beautiful place, my love, watching over you." But inside, I felt like I had lied, because no place could ever be beautiful enough to justify taking her away from us. After that, Alex was never the same. He buried himself in work, leaving before dawn, and coming back after Leo had fallen asleep. He thought endless hours at the office could drown his pain, but all it did was leave a boy without his father's embrace. I became both grandfather and parent, waking Leo for school, tucking him in at night, and telling him stories about his mother so that her memory would never fade. He would often tug at my sleeve and whisper, "Grandpa, tell me the story where Mommy sings me to sleep." And I would choke back the lump in my throat, painting pictures of her gentle voice, her warm touch, her love that still lingered, even if her body was gone. Those were hard years, but in some twisted way, they also bound us together. Leo became the heartbeat of my life, the reason I kept going, even when I felt I had nothing left. And then one day, Alex walked into my house with a woman at his side. Her name was Ava. I remember the first time I saw her clearly. She wore a pale blue dress that seemed to shimmer under the afternoon sun, her hair styled in soft waves, her lips painted a delicate red. She extended her hand to me with a practiced smile and said, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Williams." Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet, like honey dripping too perfectly from a spoon. She looked around my home, her eyes lingering on the family photos, especially the one of Maria holding a young Leo. I noticed it though, I said nothing. At dinner that night, I served the dishes I had spent the afternoon preparing: enchiladas, tacos, and a fresh mango salad. Alex sat beside Ava, his eyes never leaving her, his laughter filling the room in a way I hadn't heard in years. For the first time since Maria's death, he looked alive, as if the dark cloud had finally lifted. I wanted to be happy for him. I wanted to believe this was a second chance for our family. But Leo sat at the head of the table, quiet as a shadow. He barely touched his food, and when Ava slid a chocolate bar in front of him, with a radiant smile saying, "This is for you, sweet boy," he turned his face away, his hands gripping his fork. My son frowned, ready to scold him, but I quickly intervened. "He's just tired," I said, forcing a smile to keep the peace. But inside a tiny crack formed in my trust. Still, I tried to push away the doubt. I told myself it was normal for a child to resist change, to resent the idea of someone stepping into his mother's place. And Ava, well, she seemed so perfect, so eager to win us over. She helped clear the dishes humming as she worked, leaving the kitchen spotless. She laughed at Alex's jokes, praised my cooking, and spoke with charm that could win anyone over. Over time, she became a fixture in our lives. She would take Leo to the park, bring over gifts, sit beside him as he played with his toys. To the world, she was the image of a devoted stepmother. But I could see the way Leo shrank back, the way his shoulders tensed when she came near, the way his laughter dimmed when she was in the room. Yet, I stayed silent. I told myself not to meddle, not to be the suspicious old man who couldn't accept change. Alex was happy, and wasn't that what mattered? He had suffered so much. Didn't he deserve another chance at love? Didn't our family deserve light after years of darkness? Yes, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that Ava was the answer to our brokenness. I wanted to believe that she was not a threat, but a savior. And for a time, I let myself be blind. That's why, when I saw the drawing at the wedding, when I held that monster on paper in my trembling hand, the weight of my past choices came crashing down on me. I had ignored the signs, dismissed. The unease silenced the little voice inside me that whispered something was wrong. And now, my grandson, the child I had sworn to protect, had to speak the truth in the only way he could, through a picture no one could deny. And you listening to me now, I need to ask, have you ever ignored that little voice inside because you wanted so badly to believe in something good? Have you ever told yourself everything was fine, even when deep down you knew it wasn't? Comment yes if you've ever felt that conflict, because that is exactly the prison I was in. The days that followed Ava's entrance into our lives were painted in strange colors, at first warm, almost inviting, but underneath them lingered shadows I could not ignore. You see, red flags rarely arrive waving in the wind. They come quietly, hidden in gestures so small that you question whether you imagine them at all. That is how it began. Leo was 7, then old enough to speak, but too young to defend himself. I remember one Saturday morning, the sunlight spilling across my kitchen floor, the smell of pancakes filling the air. I was at the stove when I heard Ava's voice in the living room. At first it was sweet coaxing. "Hold still. Leo, let me help you tie your shoes." But then her tone shifted sharp as glass. "Stop fidgeting. You're not a baby anymore. Act your age." I froze the spatula in my hand, trembling. When I stepped into the room, she was smiling again, patting his shoulder, saying, "Our Leo is such a clever boy." But Leo's eyes betrayed him. He stared at me silent, a plea buried in his small face. And I did nothing. I told myself I had misheard, that maybe she was just clumsy with words. Another time she offered to take him to the park. She returned later, boasting of how much fun he had. But I noticed the stains of dirt on his clean shirt, the distant look in his eyes as he clutched his toy car like a lifeline. "Did you have fun, my boy?" I asked gently. He nodded, but he would not look at me. It was Ava who answered with her perfect smile. "He loved it. Didn't you, Leo?" And the boy nodded again, obedient as though forced into silence by some invisible hand. It is strange how children reveal truths adults refuse to see. A child will not always speak, but their silence is loud if you choose to listen. At dinner one evening, Alex praised Ava for baking a pie. He insisted Leo try it, but the boy pushed the plate away. "I'm not hungry," he murmured. Alex frowned, embarrassed by what he thought was rudeness, but I saw something else. I saw fear in those small hands gripping the table. Ava's smile tightened for only a second, but it was enough to chill me. The cracks grew wider at Leo's 7th birthday party. My adopted daughter Lucy baked a chocolate cake, the boy's favorite. His face lit up when she carried it in candles, flickering her gentle voice, urging him to make a wish. He hugged her tightly, and for a moment his laughter returned. But when Ava stepped forward, all she gave was a half-hearted pat on his shoulder, and the words, "Happy birthday, champ." No gift, no warmth, just an empty gesture. Leo shrank back, clutching Lucy's hand instead. Alex noticed nothing. His gaze was fixed on Ava, as though she were the only light in the room. I told myself not to interfere, not to spoil his happiness. He had lost Maria, and if this woman made him smile again, who was I to stand in the way? But deep down, a storm was brewing. One afternoon, while chopping onions for dinner, I overheard Ava again. "Stop spilling everything, Leo. You're such a clumsy boy." Her tone was sharp, stripped of its sweetness. My hands trembled over the knife. When I stepped into the living room, she had already masked it, praising his block tower with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Look, Grandpa!" He built it so tall she exclaimed, her smile as flawless as ever. But Leo's lips were pressed tight, his eyes wide as if begging me to see the truth. The world outside began to notice as well. His teacher called me aside one day, concern in her voice. "Mr. Williams' Leo has become so withdrawn lately. He barely talks in class. Is something happening at home?" My throat tightened, but I brushed it off. "He's just adjusting," I said. But when we walked home, Leo tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa, I don't want to go home with Miss Ava." His voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. I knelt, searching his eyes. "Why do you say that, my love?" He shook his head firmly, repeating, "She doesn't love me." That night I sat in my chair staring at the family photographs on the wall. Maria's smile shone from one of them, her arms wrapped around a younger Leo. My heart ached with the weight of memory. I asked myself, had I failed him? Had I let my son's need for love blind me to the truth staring me in the face? And yet I stayed silent, out of fear, out of cowardice, out of hope that I was wrong. I convinced myself it was just grief making me paranoid, that Ava was not cruel, but simply misunderstood. But inside doubt festered like a wound that refused to heal. Red flags multiplied like shadows in the night. Ava complained about Leo in front of Alex, calling him careless when he dropped candy at the store, saying he made her pay for his clumsiness. Alex scolded the boy, too blind to see how his words crushed him. I tried to intervene to soften the blow, but it was too late. The damage was done. Each time Leo's eyes sought mine, begging for protection, I could not give. The worst part was how well Ava played her part. To outsiders, she was charming, devoted, the perfect stepmother. She held Alex's hand in public, laughed at his jokes, complimented him endlessly. She knew exactly how to shine when eyes were on her. But behind closed doors, her mask slipped in small, fleeting moments. A harsh word, a cold glare, a hand that pushed rather than guided. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, torn between what I saw and what I wanted to believe. I told myself, children exaggerate, that maybe Leo's grief made him distant, that Ava's sharpness was simply impatience. But then I would catch his frightened eyes, and I knew deep down that something dark was festering in the heart of our family. And now I want to ask you, those of you listening to my confession, have you ever ignored warning signs because you wanted so desperately to keep the peace? Have you ever closed your eyes to the truth because admitting it would tear everything apart? If you have, then comment the number 8 right now, because that was exactly where I stood. I was a man torn between silence and confrontation, between hope and dread. Little did I know, the truth would not stay hidden much longer. The red flags had become a storm, and the storm was about to break. The day of the wedding came wrapped in gold and false splendor. The sun poured through the grand windows of the ballroom, painting everything with a glow that almost felt holy. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, a jazz band played softly in the corner. Alex looked more alive than I had seen him in years, moving from table to table, with a smile that seemed carved from joy itself. Ava, in her glittering gown, shone under the lights, her laughter echoing like bells. To the world, it was a celebration of love. To me, it felt like a theater play where I could not shake the feeling that something dark was waiting in the shadows. Leo sat beside me at table 8, pushing his red toy car across the white tablecloth. His face was calm, but I could see the heaviness in his eyes. Lucy sat on his other side, gently tearing pieces of bread for him, her soft voice coaxing him to eat. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. I wanted to believe the day would pass without incident. But peace is fragile. It takes only one crack for everything to crumble. The waiters passed carrying trays of appetizers. Shrimp cocktail, artfully arranged, gleamed under the candlelight. My stomach clenched instantly because I knew everyone in our family knew that Leo was severely allergic. His little body could not even touch shrimp without danger. I watched as the plate was set on our table, and I noticed how quickly Leo pushed it away, his hand almost trembling. I frowned. "You don't like it, my boy," I whispered. He shook his head, eyes downcast. Before I could ask more, a cousin interrupted, complimenting how much he'd grown. I forced a smile, but inside unease grew like fire. Across the room, Ava raised her glass, her perfect smile aimed at the cameras. But in that instant, I saw something different. Something sharp flickered in her eyes when she glanced toward our table. It was there only for a second, but it chilled me to the bone. Then it happened. Leo's toy car slipped from his small hand, rolling off the table and onto the floor. He bent down to retrieve it, but when he came back up, his face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He gripped my sleeve tightly and whispered, his voice trembling. "Grandpa, let's go. Please, let's leave now." My heart thudded against my ribs. "What is it, my boy? What's wrong?" I asked, leaning closer. His little hands were ice cold. He swallowed hard and whispered words that sliced through me like a knife. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" The world seemed to stop. The music, the laughter, even the glow of the candles, all of it fell away. I slowly bent down, lifting the white tablecloth. My breath caught. There, lying in the shadows beside Leo's chair, was a folded piece of paper, small, ordinary, yet it radiated menace. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and picked it up. My chest tightened as if the air itself had thickened. Around me, the ballroom carried on, guests, toasting waiters, weaving between tables. But for me, the universe shrank to this moment, this paper, and the boy, clutching my arm in terror. I unfolded it. The candlelight illuminated the words scrawled across it. Table 8. Add shrimp to the child's serving. My knees weakened, and for a second I thought I might collapse. My blood turned cold, my lungs refusing to breathe. A simple note, yet one that carried death in its ink. One bite could have taken Leo's life. Someone wanted my grandson gone, not just hurt gone. I pressed the note in my palm, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would betray me. My eyes darted across the ballroom, scanning faces. Who could have written it? Who could be so cruel? On his father's wedding day, no less. I looked at Ava, radiant in her gown, laughing with guests, holding her glass as if she were queen of the night. My chest burned with a dreadful suspicion I did not want to name. I leaned close to Leo, whispering, "It's all right, my love. I've got you." But my own voice shook, betraying the storm raging inside me. I turned to Lucy, sliding the paper across the table, my expression grave. She read it, her eyes widening, her hand instantly wrapping around Leo like a shield. She looked at me, horror written on her face, and whispered, "Who would do this?" I shook my head, unable to answer, because my fear already had a name. That was the moment the wedding turned into something else. It was no longer a celebration. It was a battlefield. And I realized that my silence, my years of ignoring the signs, had led us here. I rose from my chair, clutching the paper so tightly it crumpled in my fist. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the hallway. Near the bar, I found David, one of the waiters. I shoved the note into his hands and demanded, "Who gave you this?" His face drained of color. "My God, this is mine," he stammered. "A woman gave it to me to pass along. I must have dropped it by mistake." "Which woman?" I pressed. His lips trembled. I don't know her name, sir." I felt rage rise like fire in my veins. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. Proof that someone wanted Leo dead. And all signs, all shadows, all whispers pointed back to the bride who wore a mask of perfection. I returned to the ballroom, my steps heavy, my breath ragged. Guests raised their glasses, oblivious to the storm about to break. Leo's eyes sought mine the moment I sat back down, desperate, clinging to me, as though I were his last anchor in the world. And that's when I knew. There could be no more silence, no more pretending. I had to act, even if it meant tearing apart the illusion of happiness my son clung to. Before I continue, let me ask you, if you were in my place, holding that note in your hand, knowing your grandson's life had just been targeted, would you stay silent to preserve the celebration? Or would you rise and expose the truth, no matter the cost? Comment the number 9, if you know you would stand up, because that was the choice burning in my chest. I stood there at table 8, my hand gripping the paper so tightly the ink almost bled into my skin. The jazz band still played, the glasses still clinked, and yet the air around me had shifted into something heavy, suffocating. The note had already poisoned everything. It was no longer a wedding, it was a trap, and my grandson had been marked as prey. I tried to steady myself, but the rage inside me was a fire I could not put out. I rose from my chair, the movement abrupt enough that nearby guests turned their heads. My son Alex saw me and frowned in confusion, but I had no time for explanations. I needed the truth, and I needed it now. "Wait!" I called, my voice sharp, cutting through the hum of conversation. "Before anyone takes another bite, there is something that must be clarified." The room froze. Forks hovered midair, wine glasses halted at lips, laughter cut short. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, an old man with a trembling hand and a note crumpled in his fist. I laid the paper on the table, flattening it with fingers that shook with fury, and said, "Who wrote this? Who ordered shrimp to be added to my grandson's plate?" A silence fell so deep you could hear the candles crackle. Whispers followed, moving across the ballroom, like ripples in a pond. My son hurried forward, his face pale, his voice tight. "Dad, what's going on?" "Read it," I snapped, pushing the paper toward him. His eyes scanned the words, and I watched as disbelief drained into horror. His hands shook, his lips parted, but no words came. From the corner of the room, Ava glided forward, her gown trailing like silk, her smile carefully painted, though. I saw the tension in her jaw. "What is all this?" she asked, her tone sugary, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Surely it's some kind of joke." My rage erupted. "This is no joke. My grandson could have died." Gasps echoed. Some guests leaned in closer, their faces twisted in confusion and fear. Others muttered, "What kind of madness is this?" Ava placed a hand on her chest, feigning offense. "Are you accusing me, Mr. Williams? At my own wedding?" I met her gaze, my voice low, but thunderous with conviction. Someone in this room wanted to kill a child, and I will not rest until I know who. Leo clung to Lucy, trembling in her arms. Her eyes blazed with fury, though her voice trembled when she said, "Ava, stop pretending. We all know whose hand is behind this." That broke something. Ava's mask slipped for just a second. Her smile tightened into a grimace before she laughed lightly, waving her hand. "Lucy, you've always been jealous, always wanting to stand where I stand. Is this your way of ruining my day?" The guests gasped again, shifting their attention to Lucy, but she did not flinch. She stepped forward, her palm striking Ava's cheek with a sharp crack that silenced the entire ballroom. The sound echoed against the high ceilings like a gunshot. "You wanted to hurt him," Lucy shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. "You wanted Leo gone." The room erupted into chaos. Guests murmured, some standing from their seats, torn between disbelief and shock. Alex's face twisted in anguish, his eyes darting between the woman he had married and the family who stood against her. "Enough," he roared, his voice breaking, but even he could not control the tide that had been unleashed. And then came the voice that shattered what little illusion remained. It was small, shaky, yet piercingly clear. "It wasn't me," whispered a young girl. Gloria, Ava's younger sister, rose from her chair, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She gave me that note. She told me to deliver it to the waiter. I didn't know what it said, I swear. But it was her. It was Ava." The room gasped in unison. Every face turned to the bride, every whisper now laced with venom. "Lies." Ava screeched, her composure crumbling. She lunged toward her sister, her voice shrill. "You ungrateful child, how dare you?" But it was too late. The weight of Gloria's trembling confession tipped the scales. Even those who had doubted now stared at Ava with suspicion, disgust. My son staggered backward, his face pale, his lips trembling. "Ava, tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't—" His voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. Ava looked around wildly, searching for sympathy, for someone, anyone to defend her. But there was none. The guests had seen enough. The whispers grew into a chorus of condemnation. How could she? On a child monstrous. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound silencing the uproar. My voice cut through the air, raw and thunderous. This is no longer a wedding. This is an unveiling, and the truth is here for all to see. Leo whimpered, burying his face in Lucy's shoulder. I wrapped my arm around him, pulling him close. My grandson? My blood had been hunted by the very woman his father trusted with our family's future. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted from festivity to something primal, something dangerous. People weren't just shocked, they were enraged. A child's life had been targeted, and in that moment, Ava became a villain in every pair of eyes. Alex staggered forward, his tears streaming, his voice trembling with fury. "You tried to kill my son. At our wedding." He choked on the words, shaking his head in disbelief. "I loved you. I trusted you. And this is what you do." Ava cornered her face, pale, spat, venom back. "You're all blind. It's her word against mine. You'll believe a scared child and his bitter aunt over me, but even her defiance rang hollow." The room erupted again, shouts, condemnations, demands for justice. Even the band had stopped playing their instruments, hanging uselessly at their sides. I raised my hand, commanding silence once more. "If you think this is a misunderstanding," I said coldly, Then let the cameras in this ballroom speak. Every corner has eyes. We can review them now. Panic flickered across Ava's face. Her lips parted, but no words came. That silence, that crack in her armor, was louder than any confession. Escalation had turned the night into a trial, and the verdict was already being written in the eyes of every witness. Ava's kingdom of lies was collapsing brick by brick, until nothing remained but her exposed cruelty. And still I wasn't done, because I knew the climax was yet to come. Now I turned to you, listening to my confession. If you had been sitting in that ballroom watching the masks fall, hearing the cracks in every lie, would you have stood by silently, or would you have spoken out against her? If you believe the truth must always rise, comment yes right now. Let me see how many of you would have stood with me. The ballroom had become a court, and the bride stood trial. Ava's perfect mask, the one she had worn with grace and poise all evening, now lay shattered at her feet. Her cheeks burned from Lucy's slap. Her lips trembled though she fought to hold her smile. The guests no longer raised glasses. They raised questions, their whispers cutting sharper than knives. I stood at the center of it all, my grandson in my arms, the crumpled note in my fist. Rage burned inside me, but it was not the wild fire of youth. It was an older, deeper fury forged in years of silence and patience, now unleashed with the weight of justice behind it. Enough games, I declared, my voice echoing against the marble walls. We all know what you tried to do. We all see you for who you are now. Ava's eyes darted to Alex, desperate, pleading. Darling, you don't believe this, do you? This is your father's doing. He never accepted me. He never wanted us to be together. He's poisoning your mind against me. But Alex didn't move. His face was pale, his eyes red, his hand trembling as he pointed at her. My father didn't write that note. My son didn't imagine this fear. You did. Tell me the truth, Ava. Tell me you didn't try to hurt Leo. She staggered back as though struck, her composure crumbling. I didn't, she stammered, her voice faltering. You can't prove it. That was when Lucy stepped forward, her voice steady, though her body shook. We don't need to prove it. Your sister already did. All eyes turned to Gloria, still trembling, her face wet with tears. I only did what she told me. The girl whispered, her voice barely audible, yet sharp enough to pierce the silence. She gave me the note. She told me it was for the chef. I swear I didn't know what it said. The crowd gasped. People shook their heads, muttering words like unthinkable and monster. Even the band instruments, forgotten, stood frozen, their faces pale. Ava screamed, lunging at her sister, but two relatives stepped forward, restraining her. Her hair came loose. Her gown twisted, her beauty now distorted by rage. You liar, she shrieked. You jealous little liar. But Gloria only wept harder, burying her face in her hands. The moment was unbearable. Alex turned away, tears streaming down his cheeks. He covered his face with his hands, his voice breaking as he cried out, I brought this woman into our lives. I trusted her with my son, and she tried to kill him. A hush fell over the crowd. Alex dropped to his knees in front of Leo, his voice cracked and raw. Son, forgive me. Forgive me for not protecting you. I should have seen it. I should have known. Leo clung to him, silent tears rolling down his small cheeks. And in that embrace, the truth was sealed. I slammed the note onto the table for all to see, my voice thundering. This is the proof. This is the weapon she tried to use against my family, against my grandson. Do you all see now what she is? The guests roared their agreement. Some shouted curses, others demanded she leave at once. The atmosphere boiled with anger, and Ava stood in the center of it, her face pale, her chest heaving as she realized there was no escape. Security! I barked, and two uniformed men approached from the edge of the ballroom. Ava's eyes widened in panic as they reached for her arms. She twisted, fighting, her voice shrill. No, you can't do this to me. Alex, tell them. Tell them I'm your wife. But Alex's gaze was steel. He lifted his hand, pointing to the door. Take her out. I don't ever want to see her again. Her scream tore through the room, wild and desperate. You'll regret this, all of you. You think you've won, but you've destroyed everything. The guards dragged her toward the exit, her heels scraping against the polished floor, her gown torn at the seams. Guests turned their faces away, some in pity, most in disgust. The sound of the great doors closing behind her rang out like a verdict delivered. Silence followed, heavy, absolute. Then slowly Alex rose from his knees. His face was streaked with tears, his body trembling, but his voice, when it came, was steady. Tonight was supposed to be a beginning. He said, his words echoing across the stunned room. Instead, it revealed how blind I've been, but no more. From this day on, I will protect my son. I will not let anyone, not even someone I love, threaten his life again. The crowd exhaled, some nodding, others murmuring words of comfort. But I could feel the shift the way every guest now saw Alex not as a groom, but as a father who had almost lost everything. I pulled Leo close, feeling his heartbeat against mine. His little body was still trembling, but he looked up at me with eyes that sought safety, eyes that believed in me. And in that moment, I made a vow, not just to him, but to myself. Never again would I ignore the signs. Never again would I let silence endanger the people I loved. The climax had come, the confrontation had erupted, and the truth had burned away the lies. All that remained now was the aftermath, the ashes of what had been, and the question of what would rise from them. Now, I must ask you, those who hear my story, if you had been standing there watching the bride dragged away, her mask ripped off for all to see, would you have felt pity, or would you have felt the same fire of justice that consumed me? Comment. Okay. If you know the right thing is to stand with justice no matter how much it hurts. When the ballroom doors closed behind her, it was as though the very air shifted. The screams faded, replaced by silence so thick it seemed no one dared breathe. The chandeliers still glittered, the flowers still bloomed on the tables, but the beauty of the night had been poisoned. This was no longer a wedding. It was the burial of an illusion. I stood at the edge of the chaos, Leo pressed against my chest, his little fingers tangled in my jacket. His heartbeat still raced like a frightened bird. I stroked his hair and whispered, "It's over, my boy. You're safe now." But even as I said the words, I knew the scars of this night would not fade quickly. He had seen too much, felt too much. Trust once broken takes years to rebuild. Alex stumbled to my side, his face pale, his eyes raw from tears. For the first time in years, he looked not like a man, or even like my son. He looked like a child himself, broken, ashamed, searching for guidance. He dropped to his knees before Leo and me, his voice trembling. "Dad, how could I have been so blind?" I looked at him, my own heart torn between anger and compassion. "You wanted to believe in love," I said softly. "That is no crime. But in wanting it so badly, you stopped seeing the truth that was right in front of you, and it almost cost you your son." His tears fell freely as he pressed his forehead against Leo's small hand. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered. "Not yours, not his." Leo, quiet all this time, finally spoke. His voice was fragile but steady. "Daddy, don't leave me anymore." The words pierced through the air sharper than any accusation. Alex sobbed, pulling him into his arms, swearing through his tears. "Never again, son. Never again." Guests began to leave, their whispers still swirling, carrying the story that would echo far beyond these walls. What was meant to be a tale of love had turned into a scandal that would stain Ava's name forever. But I cared nothing for gossip. My only concern was the boy in my arms and the man beside me who had nearly lost him. Lucy came forward, her face fierce yet gentle, placing a hand on Leo's back. "You're safe with us," she said firmly. Her presence was like a shield, strong and unyielding. Leo leaned into her embrace, and I knew she would play a role in his healing, a role perhaps greater than she ever imagined. In the days that followed, life did not return to normal. It built something new. Ava vanished from our world, her threats echoing only in memory. Alex withdrew from society for a time, his shame heavy, his regret endless. He spent his days trying to mend what he had broken, sitting beside Leo at breakfast, walking him to school, reading him stories at night. It was awkward at first, the bond between them, fragile, but slowly. I saw pieces of trust returning, a boy learning to laugh again, a father learning to listen again. As for me, I found myself haunted at night by that note, by the way my hands shook when I first unfolded it, by the thought of how close we had come to tragedy. But every morning, when Leo's small hand found mine, I reminded myself why I endured. I was not just a grandfather. I was a guardian, a witness, a voice for the child who had no power against the lies of adults, and I vowed never to fail him again. One evening, weeks after the wedding, I sat on the porch with Leo. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the hues of orange and violet. He held a fresh sheet of paper and a box of crayons. For a moment, fear gripped me, fear of what he might draw this time. But as his little hands moved, I saw colors of blue, yellow, and green take shape. A house, a tree, and 3 figures holding hands. Me, him, and his father. My eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, my boy," I whispered. He looked up at me, a small smile on his lips. "No monsters this time, Grandpa. Just us." And in that moment, I knew dignity had been restored. Justice had been won, not with fists or fury, but with truth exposed and masks torn away. The scars would remain, yes, but so would the lesson: silence is the accomplice of betrayal, and only courage can shatter the chains of fear. Now, to those of you listening to my story, I have one final confession. I am old. My back is bent, my hair is gray, my days are numbered, but I still carry enough fire in my chest to fight for what matters. And I tell you this because you too will face moments when silence seems easier than truth, when doubt whispers that maybe you're imagining things. In those moments, remember my story. Remember the boy who drew a monster because no one else would listen. And choose to listen. Choose to act. So, tell me now as I end this confession if you believe that family must always protect its most vulnerable. If you believe that even an old man can rise to defend dignity and justice, then comment. 9. Let the world know you would stand where I stood. And if you think silence is safer, then do nothing. But know this silence is what nearly destroyed us. I am a grandfather. I am a father. I am a man who almost lost everything but fought to hold on. And this is my truth.